Unfortunately for Tom Allen, this is a year of great importance to him, I think, and his success. Unfortunately, he's going to have to play in the Big Ten East again this for one last year, and whether how the season goes and what Indiana does going forward is going to be there's the unknown right there. We don't know what this season is going to bring because we're used to this. The quarterback battle and all that every year. For the last 5 years, there has been an unknown quarterback, although there really has never been a battle to my mind. I've known who the starter was every year until this year. This year is actually a true quarterback battle, and I think there would probably be, and there probably would be three in this fight if it hadn't have been for Dexter's injury. But I don't know who the starter is going to be for real. But not only that, how good are they going to be? That's the thing. I don't know what level either one of, whether it's Brendan Sorsby or Jackson. I don't know where their talent level is.
Yeah, they're a hard team to read just because, they've turned the roster over so much. Essentially like almost 35, 40 new players between the transfers and the freshmen. And you've got some transfers, that I think could swing some of these games that are, essentially 50-50 games, against a Louisville, against Purdue, against Maryland. The quarterback's obviously going to matter, but if you get a certain level of competency there, I think the rest of this comes into play. And I think the performance of guys like Andre Carter, Marcus Burris, EJ Williams, who I wrote about this morning, from Clemson, a guy that showed all the potential in the world as a true freshman and just never hit that ceiling. Can they resurrect his career? Those are the guys that are going to determine if they can get to that 6-win mark, get to that bowl game mark. Because I think that's what you're looking at. Look, beating Ohio State or Michigan's, I think is too tall of a task. But with all these transfers, if you hit on a group of them, 5, 7, you're talking about really making an impact on your roster. Because they did have some returning pieces. I think Bedford on the offensive line. Jalen Lucas obviously I think is all the talent in the world. If you can blend those guys with some of these transfers, then you're trying to get back to that 500 mark. But like you said, it's hard to say, and I think there's some interest in Indiana, in teams like Indiana, teams like Colorado, who are trying to reboot their roster in a year's time, because without the teams I think we're trying to do that incrementally in the transfer portal. Now you're trying to say, look, if we're bad, why not go all in on it? And I think that's what Tom Allen did. And some positions are basically almost all new. Like 6 defensive linemen they signed. So, that's kind of crazy. Michigan State did it a couple of years ago with much success, I think. Mel Tucker was one of the first to sort of really use that blueprint when he signed a class that featured Kenneth Walker. And Walker from Wake Forest hit it out of the park. And he turned that, they haven't been the same since, but they had that really successful season. So that's what Indiana's trying to do, hit lightning in a bottle with some of these kids.
And they've unfortunately had to do a lot of that. They've been more of a transfer portal recruiter than a recruit and build program. Unfortunately, we've seen the offensive line just be atrocious over the last few years, and Darren Hiller was relieved. There was improvement last year under Rod Carey, and now that's been moved on to Bostic, and hopefully they have some improvement there because they had a good running room last year. They just couldn't protect anybody. And so, but as far as the offense, I've never known less about Indiana football team than I do this particular team. The receivers, how good they are. The running backs, still real familiar with those. But the defense, how good this defense is going to be, or the defensive backfield. I have never had as many questions for an IU football team in the last of doing this show for the last 7 years as I do for this one.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, like I said, completely rebuilt defensive line essentially. The two deep will be almost completely different. Same thing with you mentioned the defensive backfield, corner. I mean, you're essentially replacing all four of your corners from last year on the two deep. So I mean, that's a situation where it's hard to say who's winning the position, because I mean they're scouting and kind of putting that together completely. Wide receiver, Camper coming back, from a torn ACL. You figure he's kind of leading, but the rest of that room, your jockeying position, DeQuise Carter's another name I should have mentioned for transfers. An FCS guy, but had tremendous success at every level he's been at, now trying to make that leap. But like you said, not all these transfers are going to work out. So you probably want 5 to 7 starters out of that group to really flash. Can they do it? Is that too much to ask? I'm not sure. I mean, obviously the offensive line, you focused in on, and they get a really big addition. I think when you mentioned Bostad, the coach from Wisconsin, who's had tremendous success, longtime assistant over there. He's a big piece. Can he get more out of that offensive line? Because that's kind of probably where it starts in terms of the offense. But it'll be interesting to see how it all comes together. Because like you said, I mean, the cliche is there's a competition battle at every position in fall camp. But for Indiana, it's really true, because I mean they lost so much. They're bringing so many new pieces in. There's a lot of movement, I feel like, on that depth chart.
You're very familiar with your latest piece in the Herald Times is on E.J. Williams, IU receiver who come from
Clemson.
Clemson, yeah. So you had some familiarity with him probably previously to arriving here at IU.
Yeah, I covered him when I was in Auburn. He was at Central Phoenix City, which is right there in Columbus, Georgia. So I was familiar with him even in high school. And he was a kid that I thought was really talented. It's just a smooth receiver. And I mean, he made that one-handed grab a couple years ago in the ACC championship game. It was the COVID season against Notre Dame. It's still weird.
So stop right there, people. Indiana has a receiver that played in the ACC championship game.
And he would stand out. He had a 33-yard touchdown too from Trevor Lawrence. And
in a 34-10 win over number 2 Notre Dame.
That's right. And so, he had a breakout year that year. And never really matched that. Had some injuries, kind of freak stuff like a thumb injury the next year. Had his knee scoped and ended up sitting out the spring. He talked honestly. Said he thought the coaching staff kind of lost trust, and he said it. It was kind of both ways. And so he's a kind of a piece that you look at, and he's looking for playing time. Indiana can offer that. And can this be the step back to sort of stardom? Because he's a guy that obviously has NFL aspirations, and I think he's the kind of the perfect guy where I think Indiana's season is going to come down to those guys, where if he has that sort of 700, 800 yard seasons, productive, those can go a long way to get you to 6 wins. Not toppling Michigan or anything, but I think the goal is you beat the likes of Louisville, Maryland, teams that I don't think these teams on paper are all that much better, or don't have Louisville's got a new coaching staff. Maryland has been tremendously inconsistent the last couple of years. So yeah, I think those are the teams you look to beat with guys like E.J. Williams, because I think that he has all the talent in the world. He's just got to put it together.